This was recorded on February 13th, 1998. Some of the history of the Hodges family. Loyd Hodges is going to share. You can tell us that story about your grandpa coming from from Georgia and all that.
Oh yeah.
Tennessee.
You see, you want to talk about Mom and them being raised in Georgia. You see, I was talking about that deal where the different nationalities in I see, I didn't know for a time, but Mama's, see, I didn't know, but I knew there was some Scottish in there, but German and English, but Papa, Mama had some Scottish, Papa had his Irish and a little bit of Scotch and English, and not so much German, because the main thing about it, Papa's first ancestors, the first Hodges to come over to start settling the country. They were merchants, 3 of them, mainly from England, and supposed to be wealthy, and some was from Ireland. But anyhow, they's among the first. But they's wealthy, and they's developers. They's buying and opening that country. They said 2 of them just stayed 2 or 3 years, made a lot of money, and went back. They were bankers or merchants in England. They went back, and one stayed. The 3 brothers, the Hodges. He wound up helping settle Virginia then. He stayed a long time, helped it. Then the others went back, kind of disappeared. Papa said they found out he went back to Ireland pretty much. And then the other went to England. These big traders got to be well known, but they didn't. Just the one stayed and he even got up as far as helping starting at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Mama's folks, they'd come there, but that's like, you get it, what I told you about reading the name Castleberg, did? I've never found it a few years, but they still, I found out last year from a friend of mine that's got little doodrags up there, and he's from Germany, been here by, Mama's family's name was originally Castleberg. And there's a castle in Germany, they say it still existed, named Castleberg. But they come to the United States, why they changed their name to Castleberry. And Mama was born there in Gainesville, Georgia. Well, the boys was too. But anyhow, the one that went off a forebear way ahead, he wound up helping settle part of Virginia, West Virginia. Then he worked down, and they were great developers for like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They got into there. They got into coal. They got into all of it. But that side just stayed so many years, and they went back to Europe to live. But then, how come? I told you about. You didn't get told about that place called the big cemetery in Georgia called. There was a town in Georgia they settled, named it Castleberg. But because they changed the name from Castleberg to Castleberry. Anyhow, they settled in there, were farmers and merchants, everything. But this cousin of mine, Uncle Ham's boy, Uncle Marsh's, was a cousin. He and his had a twin. Anyhow, twin said, he searched all this book, all this stuff. But then Mama's parents went back, some of them went back to Scotland, but they mainly settled in Georgia. It grew from there, and then when they went from Georgia to Texas, right above Dallas, and there and homesteaded, they come in a covered wagon clear from over there across the Mississippi River and all. It so happened Papa's grandpa, he was a freighter. He freighted an oxen, and he was known to come from east of Nashville, Tennessee, and he come down through all of that the same way at the wagon train. And he's the one I was telling you about that used to freight. He got a job of freighting when above Fort Worth and Dallas was working. So the story was, he's freighting lumber, whatever supplies, sports best, groceries, everything, and using that ox tea. But the Castleberries come across there about the same time, and they settled over there close to Sherman, the other side of where Papa did. But that's how they developed in that country. Then they went to West Texas, up the other side of Lubbock. Pop stayed in and they moved to Ford. That's how it comes. But I don't know whatever. Great-grandpa Hodges, of course, he died early, and then Papa's dad is a deputy sheriff, and he there at Gordonville, where they was raised. He's going down to his job that morning, and that's when they reported there'd been a bank robbery, Jesse James in Kansas. This fellow come in and said he'd seen two. So he waited around there. He went to that store. They said that's where he usually get warm in the winter and see what was going on. They got a report, so he walked out. They suspected him that he's coming down through there and headed to Fort Worth. So he went out and talked to him on the corner. He got to talking to him, just quizzing him a little. And there were two Jesse James gang, and they had stole some horses, the report. Anyhow, he is quizzing them, and once on the right place, and he's standing on the left of that horse, and he just put his hand on the horse's neck. Watching this one directly, he just pulled his horse back, reached over the top of that other neck, shot Grandpa Hodges in the head. That's when Papa was 4 years old. Yeah. They caught one of them before they got to Fort Worth. The other, I had our boy did, and I lost her, loaned it out a True West. It told about that deal. And they didn't got one. Like a day or two going south of where Fort Worth and Dallas are. Then he got away. I guess he is really the one that shot. I don't know. Anyhow, they didn't trail him 3 or 4 years, and a bunch of caves in southern Oklahoma and all. Them people went into that bad no man's land there. That's where he got into it. Hid around a long time, but about 4 years they finally caught him and another. They'd been dug it, just living off the land, deer and what have you, existed and hiding around or stealing. They finally got him hemmed up, and they finally killed him in a gunfight 4 or 5 years after Grandpa Hodges got killed. That's kind of the story. But Mama's folks come from the other origin, and they come, see, she rode a side saddle and followed their wagon. They camped all the way from Gainesville, Georgia into what would be northwest of Fort Worth, Dallas now. That's where they settled. It's right below the Oklahoma line where the panhandle, and where it comes down in Arkansas side. So they say. That's where Papa and all his sisters were born, brothers. He had 2 brothers and 5 sisters, I believe. That's where Grandma Hodges, she died in 1918, but she had raised 2 extra cousins. She and him had an ox team, and they raised their own corn. They had to shell on their own corn and what they feed the chickens, and they lived off the land. There's lots of, he said, lots of squirrels. They eat on them. And they raised some chickens and had a milk cow. They had a hog. They'd raised some pigs and butchered them. Papa helped build some of them rail fences, because that's the reason Papa had to quit school at 4 years old, 4th grade, to help Grandma, because the others got out and worked as they got bigger, and that's the only way to survive. Lived in a 2-room rock house and cooked on the fireplace and raised them kids. They had to live off the land. They got killed a lot of them squirrels and whatever birds, and they had an awful hard time, and I had to make a lot of their own clothes. But she got them all raised. Before she died a year after Sis and I was born. Was a little over a year old, never did get to see her, of course. she was a Jones, but that's kind of mainly the history and the origin of that.
What about Grandma Prater? That was your...
Oh, Grandma Prater. Yeah, she was a... I told you her original name was Hope, you know. Went by that. Then she married great-grandpa Prater. And she only, Grandma Castleberry, Mama's mother, was her only child. And he joined the Civil War, but to get back to it, the city of Hope, Arkansas was supposed to have been named after Grandma Prater, or the Hope side, supposed to have been named after them. So the story is, I don't know if it's true or not, because when he left and went to Civil War, there's gone 58 years where he showed up, and then he had married an organ raised. He never did report back. And my grandmother, Mama's mother, was her only child, so they took her and raised her. She spent her life and died at their house. Just about 2 years, yeah, little tiny. But she had all of that. She's one of the old hardy ones that worked with everything. Everything was tough. They told her about the hardships coming across that unsettled country, part of Georgia and Arkansas and all that. Was no open trails or hardly maybe a wagon. They took it, cut straight across and crossed the Mississippi River. Mama sat on that bridge and wound up at where Dallas is now. They just hung a place to settle. That's how Grandpa Hodges settled. That's how Papa got, and old Grandma Hodges got acquainted. Mama and Papa got acquainted. One of her brothers and Mama was riding Mama's roadside saddle. And they was riding side by side and go to church, and Papa said to him and his mother's walking, come by, and he said he told her, I think he was about 18 or something. He said he called her Ma, said, I told Ma, there's the one for me, and sure enough, in a year and a half he had married her. That's not you. That's the right story.
Wow.
But that's the origin of them, and who knows, where their hopes had probably come down and was maybe the eastern part, but they was also southern like the Castleberry family. But when I asked this, so that's how come they formed that town, and to see all that, this cousin, he's a real educated, he got that up, he died several years ago, he'd been older than Bud, about 2 years. But he got this book together and looked this up, and he researched it and went back there and to that to see when they come to Louisiana, come to the States, Castleberg, and they didn't want that influence, and it's a little bad, I guess, on Southern German name, so they changed it to Castleberry. But Castleberg, and then there's that big castle in Germany. This friend of mine's told me it was still in there. He's raised in that vicinity. I just happened to think of that, yeah. So I guess that's about the swipe of the way they come. Part from England, part from Ireland, and Scotland, England, and some from Germany. And anyhow, they migrated to migrated and helped settle the United States. That's the way they're supposed to be, the whole origin.
When did they move to Monday, Texas, your mother and dad?
Papa?
Uh-huh.
Monday. See, off towards Wichita Falls, big oil field. Papa, and my oldest brother, he couldn't go to the army. He worked at Cliff. He got to be a rigger field. And Monday, Papa and them, see, when his mother, Uncle Will kept his mother till she died, but because his dad had been killed. They had been there, and then they got a start, and they split that home. They just had the interest over by Highway Park and that. And it was divided among them. Uncle George and Uncle Will, he really got the prime part. That's where oil and that was. Anyhow, Uncle George But Papa, I thought he'd get the old place by the Highway Park, but it was Uncle Will's right, wasn't it? And he was staying there to take Grandma Hodges, so Papa and Mama just married, so he got his wagons and teams and went to look at it. He went over there, well, a year or two, he hauled water to them oil fields in 1918, 19, and Cliff was working there. But Cliff couldn't get in the army because he's flat-footed. But he tried. But anyhow, that in there is where in 1915, Papa went over and rented that with the right to buy. And Uncle George, he went up to Canyon and went to work for the state. That's the way they scattered. And then Papa, he'd farm in there. Lee Drummond and him went partners out of Monday. He kept that a while, and then but he'd go take his team, and he'd gone weeks at a time, and he wasn't but about 60 miles or so to that Burke Burnett oil boom, 80 miles. And Cliff was working on an oil rig, and Papa went over and got a job. He had big wagons, a big water tank. He hauled water to them oil rigs. And Cliff was working there. He just started out. He couldn't. It wouldn't take him in World War I because he's flat-footed. Well, he wasn't but 17. He turned and went to the oil fields, and that started his career. And Papa'd go in the winter, he'd lay his crop by and put them up. He'd go where it makes extra money in the winter and haul water to them oil rigs as his team. Wow. That's how it come in. That's the way the family split up. But I tell you another thing, somebody could get to where here, Bud, ask him about that. He was older and he probably got a better. If there's anything I missed additional, he'll know. Bud will know. Yeah. Because it's all put down. But that's about all the excitement, wasn't it? There was to it. That's the history of this. I remember Papa talked about it a lot. Sometime Uncle George or Uncle Will, Uncle George was older than Papa, and he knew more about it. He remembered more and done more in the car. But that's the way it was. As I remember him telling it, and I heard him tell it a lot. So, Sissy, that's kind of the story. Yeah, that's the kind of the story, the origin of the Hodges family. That's right. You got some Scots, you got some Irish, got some English, and got some German. So, way back. So, that kind of straightens the whole thing out, as far as I know.
What year did you move to Silverton then? What year did you move to Silverton?
1925. Papa bought that place in 1924, sold out at Monday. He had to get out of the business. Him and another fellow had a store for several years. And they bought and sold wagons or teams, sold groceries, what have you, and then farmed it. And he got too heavy and he had to sell it out and go back. That's all of it. But Cliff was born out there about 7 miles northeast of Monday at that old house that Bud's got the picture of. Did you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. All but Cliff, and he was born over there by Highway Park, close to Wichita Falls. Then they moved, and the others are supposed to be in all of that old. See there, I don't guess you knew it, but it don't make any difference now. But see, there was another boy born between Bud and Jewel. They called him Joy, but he's stillborn. I didn't know it for years, 15, 20. He's buried at Gold Reading. Papa went to put him in old schooling where we lived. That was east of Monday, country school. I know me and sis started school, and we had to walk 2 miles across the field to school at the house on the hill. Pack our lunch. That's the way we started the first grade. Then Papa sold out. Then we had to go back and start over again the next year because we never. Monday started. Then he sold out. Went to Monday. Then we lived in town. He built a house. And him and a fellow named Gene McStay bought a grocery store, general store together. They sold groceries. and stuff like that, and they all sold wagons and teams. Yeah. Harness, everything a farmer could use. But he had to go back. He got too heavy, and he got to weigh in 285 and get back to that farm. But he probably liked to eat, and he'd sit around and eat them sweets and stood around that store too much. Because when he sold out, they told him better watch. Papa weighed 285 when he moved back to farm. I remember riding with him because of mule teams. He'd let me sometimes drive with them 2 gentle mules. He'd let me open the gates too. I was just a kid. But that's where it all started. And I remember when they got first Model T. Of course, Sis and I were born in 1917, but they come out, Papa wanted second-handed because we didn't. And so they wouldn't have to. They usually went to, like summer church, they'd go in a wagon and take some blankets, and if we got sleep, put us to bed, and they did, and they'd all go away. Everybody went to, as Model T's is coming, but most we had to, and went to wagon, and Papa and them did, the older ones, and most of the time in a buggy. Then they finally got a Model T. It barely gets through that sand. But you had to go use wagon and team. Now the people like this visit around, it's like on Sundays. It's great to visit on Sundays and have them. Then all of them drove teams. Sometimes they had 4 or 5 kids. They had to go do all their traveling and hook a team of mules up and put 2 spring seats or spread. Put the kids in there and them just watched. They went visiting, or they went to church, or went to town on business. And that was the travel then. Then the single men usually had buggies that's done their courting in, or a lot of them would go horseback. The women of folks they used the roadsides, had the women folks, and later, but that's the way they got around.
Would you tell about how you used to go in the buggy and have to put the rocks in there to keep warm? Eat rocks?
No, Mama done that. That's a habit. You better follow them in the wagons. That buggy, it had a curtain in there for bad weather, and when Sister Joe's ill, I had to hook. I went horseback because it wasn't too bad, but I went with them, followed them, and I put that your lines in it, but it had a kind of ice, and it's a good buggy. You had a behind. That's where you could put the horse in, or you could put your lunch bucket in. But it's cold, and it had a size, but it had that isinglass. So when it's cold, it was a pretty day, they drive all right. When they had barn built, but the cold days, so they wouldn't have to expose their feet. Mama or Papa, when they got up and built a fire, he put couple of bricks down in the coals or in the stove. And so whenever I'd go do my chores or catch the horse and buggy, get the horse with the buggy, and then if it was cold, I'd drive. Otherwise I'd go horseback. It's cold. Well, Mama, she had good wool blankets and all this curtain here in front. The isinglass, a sort of form of glass. Was it? Somebody called?
The phone, yeah.
Huh? And she'd put that in and they put their feet in and put this bricks down in the bottom, and that heat them blankets, and they wrapped their feet and legs there. That kept their feet. But of course I had different clothes. That way they didn't have to step in the snow. And that is all pretty well closed in so much you could. They'd break that window, and then a couple of bricks in there, Papa put a heat them, and put them in there and wrap them, the quilt or blanket or something. And they get down there and tuck that around their feet. That'd keep their feet and legs warm all the way to school. Yeah. If it wasn't bad, why, they'd drive the buggy. If it was, why, then it had a windbreaker you could see out the front. I'd drive it in bad weather so they wouldn't have to get their feet or hands cold. They could bundle up, and Mama would put an extra blanket. They'd wrap up around it and snuggle. And I had gloves on and warmer clothes, so That's the way we went. And it took a while, but never see that anymore. We That's pretty well a story, sissy, I remember. But then later we got them people wanted to get the Model Ts, and so other families around on the rented farms. Well, anybody, one car pickers finally, if it got, and Papa, when they got to get closed-in cars, they'd take the turd and roll it. No heaters, but they'd take, especially the girls, it was real cold. The cut was like me and Bud and the Dillers. Sometimes we got to ride in it. Sometimes we didn't for a while. The girls on that route, they got the preference, of course, because, we could dress warmer or we could walk easier and trot. That's just what they done. And them bricks are always heated on that floor of that thing, and put it in a bucket on or something where it wouldn't burn the floor, and wrap it good. You get that real hot, that rock, it wouldn't be no flame hit it hardly. But that'd wrap it quick and it'd stay warm. A lot of times, clear till noon, it'd keep the blankets they wrapped their feet in and quilts. It'd keep that warm. Therefore, they didn't have to, they didn't have to expose themselves too much to made it better for them, They had the windbreak in front, and you could look there and see a horse in front there. You drive, how to drive that. Sometimes you drove two to that buggy. Said Monday, it wasn't. You just worked one horse to the buggy. For several kids we had one time, fixed what they call contract out of axle and all, and no frame, and get several in there. And we had a team of mules we drove, but they was boxed in pretty good, and had the back gate and extended. It had old Model T tires on it, and the stuff the tires, get them old tires, we'd have to stuff them with cotton, and then another type of, that's when automobile 28, getting off, wrapping that tight on and put it in a good frame, and put a seat on each side. Then we had a door in front, and they had a window in the front. You could see how to drive them mules. Might be 3 families going in.
Wow.
But it's a decent horse. When I was Bud, he went most of the time. He had a paint horse. He went most of the time horseback. As soon as high school, he left, and he was helping Papa. We had neighbors over there, and they had to work for real. They got him to come over there and just stay and take care of their little farm, and they paid him so much and fed him. So the last 3 years at school, Bud didn't really live at home, was across there, but he went horseback over there. And the rest of us went to go, but of course I'd drive the buggy in bad weather. Otherwise I got it ready and they could drive. But Bud, recent times was hard. The last 3 years I remember, it gotten it tight. Well, he'd come help a few days, and sometimes he'd come over. If then he had to go back there and be ready to school the next morning. Of course, I was smaller and we had all that other work to do. We was busy. I had a lot of chores in the morning, and a lot when I got home. To get ready, I'd go out before daylight and feed the horses, and I had to feed the hogs too, and pack them water and slop. And then grease the buggy twice a week, and I had to harness that horse and hook him up and take him around the front, so the girls could get in, and I'd go back and get my horse, saddle horse. Then I'd get ready and go to school. Get home, I had a Bud. When he was home, I'd help Papa milk a lot. We had several, that was a part of our livelihood. But I was usually feeding the horses and the cows and the pigs. A lot of the time I wouldn't get through till after dark. Then you had to go in and eat, and pack wood in and go in and eat and get your lessons. Then get up in the morning and get all that fed, get your breakfast, clean clothes, hook up then put on clean clothes, pull it around in front so the girls could put on clean clothes and go to school again. There's lots of hustle. I helped Papa on that. Once in a while the neighbor, Bud come home wicked, he always left the coast to come see your mama and papa. And that's the way we got by. And then Papa, one time I remember Papa wanted working on a Sunday at a broken down windmill. We never did work on a Sunday. And in summer, when I got the crops pretty well ready, up in August, sometimes we wouldn't have to work on a Saturday or a Saturday afternoon. Those are days you went and got a haircut or went to town. Used to drive that team in there when it needed, take wheat and always pressure and wheat and other grain to get it ground and make flour and cornmeal and go to town and take so much and weigh it back. It's depression too. And I got to make it on flour and that made good cereal too. A good wheat. Anyhow, it's different from that. But farm kids all had to do it. A lot of them farm kids walked 3 or 4 miles there and back to school. Didn't have transportation. The others cooperated. Them schools was about 8 miles apart. Yeah, they were so far on each side. 4 different.
How far did y'all have to go?
What?
How far did you have to go to school?
Well, we was just about 4 miles. 3.5 or 4. But you had to be there by 8 o'clock. Then you had to stay. Winter times when it got bad, it get dark. Then you had to stay till 4 of the afternoon. Winter days, well, sometimes wind was so big cold. You had to get out and walk, or if you laid your feet and hands there. Then go home, and Mama always had something for us. So she had some jelly rolls or something, or some cornbread and bacon, left some breakfast egg. Get that, we'd all sis and make her lunch and take them gallon syrup cans and put them, and she'd make bean sandwiches and always had meat of some kind, sausage or biscuits and eggs, and Mom would have little save them quart jars and put in some milk and put it in a buggy. We'd have milk for noon. Sis made most of the lunches, and Jody L. Younger, she'd help her. But then she didn't see very good. But of course, we was the last ones, at home. Now, Papa, sometime I'd help him milk at night if I had time. Otherwise, wintertime he didn't home. He'd milk them cows, and he had to take that milk in and sell the whole milk, and then a lot of times they'd make butter. That helped pay part of the grocery bill. And traded in on a grocery bill in town. He'd deliver it 5 or 10 gallon cans, and they'd take it in there and they could haul it in the wagons. Then they'd churn it in there and sell the butter, and then the skim milk. Some people buy it or cook with it, and then the people buy that other and churn it for butter, sell it, or trade it in on groceries. So we needed it. As you had chores every day. Papa done most, but we all get after it Sunday morning and get it in at night or late in the evening, because he nearly all went to church. That was part of our living. And we trade some of that pork or butcher, and Mama had extra eggs, we'd sell them in town. Sometimes you churn that butter home, we'd take it in there and sell some milk and eggs and trade it in on potatoes, whatever you needed. That's the way you got by. Hardly anybody had any money. But things are cheap. You can buy a pair of socks like this, 35 cents. Breeches, these breeches were $1 a dime or so. And a coverall. It's a good pair of shoes, depending on the size, $2.50 to $3 to $5. Sometimes men's shoes, heavy-duty shoes. For that, they'd last forever. If you hadn't, you couldn't have made it because nobody was making anything. Depression, you just helped feed each other. If you had to save what little you had to buy clothes for the winter, warm clothes, or Mama made a lot of her own clothes, like her underwear. And they knitted, a lot of times they knit socks, and the women folks always knitted and made take cut up old quilts or socks or breeches, and they'd make their own blankets and what have you. Not blankets, but quilts is what I'm trying to say. You had to utilize it, and then a lot of times they got to making putting flour in. Got to making pretty chairs. They had some dye and all. I remember when that come out. Boy, there's a fad. There's a lot of it pretty, and they'd save them, wash them. There's pretty dyed ones, them flour sacks and stuff, colored. They'd bleach them out, and that the women had they hold a fireplace, but a lot of the women they made quilts out of that, and sometimes they'd make. If you got a pretty sack, the girls in the family, they'd make a pretty dress out of that, pretty black. And it'd be pretty. They'd make all of that at home, and then later, it wasn't many years they got above it, and they made all their own dresses. They'd get together and have quilted bees, or might help each other. They'd save different pretty clothes, and they'd make clothes out of that. Sometimes underwear, whatever they had. I know in old flour sacks, they's all used, bleached out, they's all used. Sometimes if you had to spare them, you had them for dish towels. But sometimes they'd make, like for the girls, they'd make their blouse and what have you out of them. And sometimes they'd make a pretty skirt. Because hardly anybody could ever buy one. And the older women had made that, but they had wore them long dresses. Yeah. And they saved it. They was made at home. Bleach that out. And then sometimes they bleach them and like make bed sheets. And they made all their own quilts, saved that cotton and scraps of quilted beans in squares. Jake's got one, except he married, that was Mama's quilts, but I got one or two at home. Mama's and Grandma's quilt, Grandma Preacher. Grandma cousin. Old boy stole one a few years ago, but the one Jake kept in his bedroom, whatever. I was supposed to. It was one of. I had one of Mama's and then one of Grandma Castleberry's. She made just before she died, but it got away. It had to utilize everything. Just say get up early and cook on one of them. Papa, at least he got one kerosene stove with smoke. Putting that out, it made it easier than, of course, in the wintertime it'd cook with wood and that'd help heat the hair. But the two would get through at night. I had to, it's my responsibility to get the wood in, and I'd have to split that. I had a little wagon Papa made. When I got through chores, I'd go by and get some wood, and then I had to load the wood box on the back porch was kindling, and the wood for the next morning. Then you got to go, as soon as you chores, you got to eat supper. That do your lessons. They fill the lamps with kerosene. Papa usually does that, Mom. I got kind of overloaded after Bud went away from home.
How big was their farm, Dad?
What?
How big was the farm?
Papa was farming 240 acres. Well, he had 320, but he was leasing 40 cliff on. He went partners on one.
Did he work it by himself, or did he have helpers?
Have what?
Did he have help? Your dad, did he have help besides you?
But yeah.
Farming?
He'd get help if we needed it, but we worked with
both of it.
Yeah. We had to stay out of school too, and in the fall if they had to help harvest cotton or that feed, we had to stay out of school some and get that done. And then, like one year I had to stay and help a long time, and Sis went to school twice a week, 4 days a week, and I'd go once and take a test, and she'd bring all the tests home, and I had to help Papa and then a neighbor to make some money for winter clothes. And I missed quite a bit of school, and then I had to make it up. But she'd bring the lessons, and we'd get it in. I'd fill out mine, send it back, and she'd take it back in once a week, then I'd get my grade, but I wouldn't get to go but about sometime every second Thursday. Then I'd work the rest of the week and then work for the neighbors, help make ends meet. Then when they worked out the neighbors, we pooled our money. Mama took care of it. So take us in October, and she'd take us in when they got all the crops together, and you'd work for extras as long as you could, as long as save that, and then we'd pool that money to give it to Mama. She'd put it up, and then take us Saturday night. Just go in and buy the girls new dresses or clothes for school, and get me a bud, whatever. We'd get us some overalls and maybe new shoes for the winter. Take all of that and divide it evenly, buy clothes to get through the winter. Wow. We all worked and did some 1 hours more, but that's the way we balanced it. Well, sissies, that help any?
That's good.
Huh?
Yeah.